For those of you that don't know me, because hopefully some people will like work with me and will want to repeat. My name is Valentin. I am from Spain, although I'm living in Los Angeles for it's going to be 11 years in February, which is as long as I've been at Disney Animation, working as an animator, a supervising animator. Before that, I worked in London for 4 or 5 years, working on visual effects, mostly working on a couple of feature films. Was mostly like before that I had worked in 2D animation in Spain and in London. I work in some European productions. I also work in London in Sinbad, the last 2D animated movie that Dreamworks did. And then after that, I had to kind of go back to square one and learn computer animation. And I got the opportunity to join some VFX companies in London. So that was a huge learning experience for me. Took me a while to kind of go back to the same place where I can just think about animation, not just about 2D or CG, but that made me very aware of the things that work the same, the things that are not similar, the things that you have to change in one medium if you want to achieve the same thing in the other.
Yeah. Rock and roll. Do you think that the 2D set you up nicely for 3D though? Do you think starting in 2D benefited your career? You find it easy to, not easier, but it helps at the early stages to kind of get your ideas out the head. And you know, you didn't have to, at least you didn't have to learn animation. You kind of just had to learn the software, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't say I don't think that you're a better animator if you've done 2D before. I know amazing animators that have never done 2D. In my case, after a few years of working on both mediums, I realized the things that I wanted to keep and the things that I learned from computer animation, from 2D animation, that sometimes I see in students when you're especially when you're starting, if you haven't done 2D animation, one of the most difficult things is working beyond what the computer gives you in terms of like pushing the animation or thinking ultimately both 2D, CG, stop motion, whatever animation that you're doing, your goal is to put something on a screen in a frame. And sure, you might have stereo or not, but mostly you're working on a graphic shape
Mhm.
that when you work in 2D, you might not have that sense of depth. Definitely, you don't have a camera that changes, distorts things, so you have to work for the camera. But ultimately, in essence, you're working towards putting like a composition, a moving composition in a frame. And when you work in 2D, you start with a blank page. So you kind of have to think about everything, or
Mhm.
at least have to think about a lot of things that you get as a given on the computer. And then that allowed me to kind of know what I wanted to get
Okay.
by working on the computer, And it's like, okay, how do I get here? How do I make like a strong pose? How do I make a clear silhouette? Um, and something that I notice a lot with people that are a bit more junior on the computer is that the way they push things is it's a bit timid because they approach the puppet as the character as a puppet.
Mhm.
So it's like, oh, okay, so if the shoulder goes to here, that's where I'm gonna put it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, if
Yeah.
I'm drawing, if I'm doing my rough, it's like, okay, I want to make a statement with the shoulder, and maybe I would put it here, you know? And it's very kind of rewarding as a teacher when you give permission to the students to break things.
Yeah.
And nobody's going to notice. What they're going to perceive is the emotion of the pose, the storytelling value of the pose. Not like, oh, that shoulder shouldn't be here. Of
Yeah,
course,
yeah.
here a lot
100%.
of other things, but it I got into a lot of trouble when I started animating in CG because I would like I wouldn't be careful about doing these kind of things, you
You'd
know.
be careful not to do
I
it.
wouldn't be. I wouldn't be tidy, and it's like that moment that it's pretty universal. It doesn't go away when you go from like step to spline.
Mhm.
When I was starting, it was a complete nightmare. Like I didn't know anything about gimbal lock. I didn't know anything about like stretching things to the point that the texture will break.
Yeah,
The change of spacing and timing is completely different in CG and in 2D because in CG you have a volume that is consistent. So it's much more unforgiving in terms of like you want to make the spacing like polished and clean, and you want the transitions. I think that in 2D animation, I cannot speak for stop motion because I don't have any experience on that, but the you might get away with like a more aggressive spacing or timing, where in the computer uh, it doesn't work as well. Um, you know, but the good
yeah,
thing is that I knew where I wanted to get. Sometimes you just want to just have a feeling about something, and then the difference is that it might take me, I don't know, 15 hours without sleep to get there in the computer because I had to make so many mistakes that now I'm like, okay, this is how I can get it the best possible way without making my life impossible when I'm about to polish something.
yeah.
Um, but that's probably a good example of what I meant by going back to where I was in 2D, but in CG, in terms of like this is what I want to achieve on the screen. This is what I think the scene needs in here. And then I'm definitely very aware. I'm very grateful of my tools from 2D and from CG to get there. And but yeah, I made a lot of mistakes on the way.
Absolutely. I think it's unavoidable. And I saw an interesting it was Ed Sheeran actually. He
Yeah,
said he said you learn absolutely nothing from success.
yeah, oh yeah,
And it's true. It's true. You can't literally learn because you're just doing it. And so it's only from the mistakes.
yeah.
Did you because you transitioned at the time when it was all transitioning. So were you weren't the only one, right? Were your like your leads or soups, were they also 2D that went to 3D? Was there kind of a support there, or was it just you
Um,
kind of snuck in there?
it was a different time. I have to say, I got my first job in CG because the 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 head of animation of a project had been a 2D animator that knew my work. We work in 2D in some studios in London that were the same. So there was a certain level of trust in
Mhm.
there. And I was very aware of these, and I didn't want to let him down. Um, but it would definitely was a trial by fire in that
Yeah,
sense. Um, but at the same time, I think that things have changed a lot in this time. I'm talking about 2007, something like that. That's when I transitioned mostly,
yeah,
sometime between 2006, 2007. There was a bit of a sense of 2D was the past,
mm,
and some people, not everyone, also that wasn't the experience at Disney. I wasn't at Disney at the time. It was more like maybe certain studios that didn't have a tradition of 2D. I didn't see that many people around me that were coming from 2D. Uh, I always wanted to work for Disney. So I
yeah,
knew that at some point I need to do the transition. But if that's not a goal of yours, some people, not a lot, unfortunately, but some people have kept working in 2D all their careers, and that's fine. And it was a bit of a sense of move over a dinosaur.
yeah,
And then over the years, it's been it's been kind of beautiful to see how 2D has been embraced, you know, to the point that sometimes some projects that made me wonder, is like, why don't you do it in 2D? So now there's a lot of like CG projects that want to replicate a different look. I mean, Spider-Man or the Ninja Turtles, they make incredible use of the computer to come up with something new and fresh. But there's been some projects that you see around that is like, you might as well do it in 2D. Because if
yeah.
you do that. Um, but definitely there's a sense in I think in my experience of um, there's a lot of value in 2D
Well, I think for teaching it's incredible because the one thing I suck at is drawing, and so when I'm trying to quickly show someone a pose,
Yeah.
not quick at all. Just like it's absolutely not quick. It's a long time before I finally get what I want because I can't just draw it out, and it's
Yeah.
never beautiful to look at. So I remember watching your drawovers in when you were mentoring and just thinking like, wow, it's like it's on model, it's looking perfect, and it must just be so much easier for the students to be able to see that and see a
It,
perfect kind of 2D
it's the
image.
fastest way to yeah, it's the fastest way to communicate an idea for sure. But
Yeah,
having said that, you don't need to know how to draw to incorporate drawing into your workflow because ultimately the things that you want to care about are things like line of action or silhouette. You can literally make a statement with sticks and balls, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Literally. It's just like if one of the most difficult things of the computer is keeping things fluid and organic
Mhm.
because you have to touch one control at a time. So if you just make a thumbnail before you start animating or over your first play blast of just a line of action in there, so you have like a blueprint of where you want to get. So when you're like lost in the middle of like the tweaking of the things, you still have a goal, like a clear line in there. It's kind of
Yeah.
a complicated way to go back to simplicity, posting things on the computer. But in that sense, drawing is super helpful in that sense, but you don't need to do it pretty or a model.
No, no, but it's definitely beautiful to look at. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So you wanted to work at Disney and you did it. That's cool. That's cool. If that was a goal of yours, you did.
um,
Now you're super.
yeah, yeah, but also something that I learned in hindsight is that every step of the way was a learning experience.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
I don't think I would have enjoyed working at Disney, or I think I would have been a worse artist if I hadn't gone through a lot of other works that maybe at the time because I was young or I was not seeing a clear path forward, I would have thought, "Oh, this is horrible," or "Oh my God, this is not where I want to be," you know.
Yeah.
And then you get to Disney, and then you find yourself using tools because here's the thing: there's never enough money, or there's never enough time. You know, I've been asked pressure in a tiny studio with no budget as working on some like multi-million blockbuster. You know, there's
Yeah.
never enough time or money. So if you've been through like different all levels of productions, working in the uh, different conditions, it's like sometimes you use some cheap trick that you learn from working on some cheap production because you had to cost money, and that saves your ass because you can deliver that super nice scene and some like beautiful production on time.
Yeah.
um and also it makes me more grateful of the good things because sometimes if you go from like school to Disney, you don't really know how the world out there is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely. I had a really interesting moment once when I was at work, and I don't know, it was just a group of us, and I was mentioning all the jobs that I had done before animation, and then
yeah,
I said, "What about you guys?" And they're like, "No, we just went straight to animation." I was like,
yeah,
"What? You haven't suffered?"
yeah,
I did every other job under the sun before I
yeah,
started animation,
yeah,
and it was really interesting that they'd never done carpentry or like worked at a
yeah.
bar or just anything like that. It was really interesting.
Also, it's very cool the sense of community that you have from working in different jobs with different people, and then you run into the same people again, or you meet new people. That's something that I bring a lot in my work. When I'm supervising, I try to be the kind of lead that you can push for the best possible work, but then you can have a pint in the pub after work, if
Yeah,
that makes you know,
yeah,
because that's very much part of what I love about animation is that you just you meet people that tell you stories about working with Richard Williams, in
Yeah.
some studio, and then when you work at Disney, I'm super grateful of not having to look for a job every time I finish a movie. But at the same time, it's very easy to get sucked into the Disney bubble,
Hmm.
which is just your Disney people. Um, so that sense of like camaraderie of like we're making a movie together is something that I learned from working in studios that might not have been as big. So, you know,
Yeah, absolutely. I think I always say as well, it's like a when you're making a film, it's such a large chunk of your life. It's like
yeah,
half of your life that you're spending with the same people, and so I associate like a film with a certain time of my life, if that
yeah,
makes sense. Like
yeah,
I can remember living in this flat, working on this scene,
yeah,
and then we moved to this house at this film,
yeah, yeah.
and all the people you meet along the way. It is really cool like that. So what then what would you say you try to put in your work the most? Like when you start a shot, obviously you watch the film, you see the storyboards, what needs to be in there. But when you're animating, what are some things that you like to try to get into your work to kind of make it elevated? If that makes sense.
Hmm. I think the most important thing is to be aware of what needs to be done
Mhm.
and make sure that I'm doing it in the right direction. Uh, then for that, you have the storyboards, the layouts, some animatic of the movie. You also have your fellow animators working on the same sequence. You have the lead on that character. There's a lot of things that you need to check, and you should check to make sure that you're just not working in the void or for your own personal satisfaction. You
Yeah.
know, like a show off. Sometimes the hardest thing is it's a cliche, but it's so true. It's the simplest thing. You know, and that exercise of like this is what needs to be done here. I've been lucky to work with people like Mark Hen at Disney. Um, for those that don't know,
No, I don't know who that is. No.
Mark
Who-
Hen,
oh,
Mark
yeah.
Hen, he recently retired, but he was working at Disney until December. He started at Disney 43 years ago.
Okay.
He was supervising animator on Ariel, on Jasmine, on
Okay.
Belle, on Young Simba, Mulan. I think Tiana was the last. Tiana and Winnie the Pooh were the last two movies they did in 2D at the studio, and he was the lead on Tiana and Winnie the Pooh. So amazing animator, incredible work. He would never do anything unnecessary in his shots. There's no fat in his
Yeah.
shot, and he was fast, and he was humble, and he would always tell me, just look at the storyboards. Just look at what people have done before you. Just think of
Yeah.
why is this shot in the movie.
Mhm.
Wasn't working with us on the movies, like putting animating in CG, but he was definitely a mentor. Working with thumbnails is also something that I learned from him. It's That's probably one of the most important things. And then once you know that, I care a lot about appeal.
Mhm.
I care a lot about posing. It's so easy the computer doesn't know anything about appeal.
Yeah.
AI so far doesn't know anything about appeal. That's something that you bring yourself. It's it's um it's hard. You have to fight the computer, and it's one of the things that you need to know what you're looking for because some of the things are not counterintuitive. It's like you have to do it this way. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I think appeal is interesting as well because I think there's no formula to it because it changes all the time. Like
Yeah.
in terms of like the character, what works for this character doesn't work for this character, and so I think it's something that you get over time. Like it's not. I don't think there's a shortcut to finding appeal too much. What
No.
I've
The
found
opposite.
is,
It's the
yeah,
opposite. It's like you have to work on things that you think that they're fine the way they are out of the box. and you have to think, and that's something that I've noticed working with students. It's like there's so many little things that make the whole difference.
Mm.
It's like appeal is not just a line of action, which is also important, but it's like how the eyebrows, how the eyelids, how the lashes work with the pupil,
Yeah,
how the silhouette of the teeth function in the mouth. Like it's normal, and I don't expect otherwise. That's why I feel that I bring something to the students, because none of the students thinks about this. It's like move the teeth in the mouth. It's like, wait, what? No, but we humans don't move our teeth. It's like it doesn't matter, you know. You
yeah,
have to be believable. You don't have to be real. And
yeah,
it is so much like low quality animation with like ugly shapes inside of the mouth of the denture, because no one thinks about moving the teeth so it makes a good silhouette inside of the mouth, so those things are very important.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's an interesting one. I think that kind of depends on uh, where you're educated, because I think a lot of like for me, my university, like what I'm saying is some of these things are taught, but not early as they should be. Like we
Mm,
teach these sorts of things now in the mentorship after people have already gone through 3 years or 2 years of uni.
uh,
They do a mentorship, and this is the first time they're hearing about this. And it's a pretty simple thing that they probably could have grasped 6 months ago. You know what I mean? Like with the teeth and stuff like this. And so I think this is a bit of a side note actually, but I just think the universities these days could have better curriculums in terms of animation, and really, you can really focus more
yeah.
deeply on getting this out in students a lot earlier than it is.
I think appeal is something that is not taught in many schools. It's definitely something that I um no it's not that I discovered it at Disney. Is that I in a way was given permission because it was to go there.
Mm.
Nobody asked me for that in most like studios. Also, I have to say, VFX animation, it has a completely different set of requirements.
Yeah,
Appeal is something that you might want, like if you're working in Godzilla, for instance, you want to make a cool, powerful pose of Godzilla, but you're not going to be working about how beautiful the eyelashes make a silhouette over the pupil, Of
yeah,
course, Disney Disney has brought a lot of the principles from 2D animation into CG. It's like, so in that sense, that's something that I care a lot about. But it's also something that is not exclusive to Disney. It's like all CG animated movies need that. You
yeah,
know, it's
hmm,
lucky that I'm at a place where that is very very valued
yeah.
in terms of like posing and appeal is something that I look forward a lot. And then another thing that I care a lot about is rhythm. I think of
Yeah, yeah,
music in a
yeah,
way, so that's something that yeah, I enjoy a lot, like polishing those kind of things, experimenting when you get to a point when you have like maybe your poses in there, and you start putting breakdowns and you start playing with the timing and see how it works.
yeah.
Experimenting with working in step and then in spline, but maybe working from the beginning in spline, incorporating very strong poses, like the same thing that I would do, but maybe when you press play, you have this dance with the computer where the computer is giving you something, and then you kind of sculpt over that instead of like, that's something, for instance, that you cannot get from 2D animation. Is that you either put everything in there or no one is going to put it for you. But when you're working on the computer and then you're animating and you're playing, and it's like, oh, can I get away with like frames less in here? What happens if I hold this moment in here? And it's almost as if hearing music, you want texture in your animation.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
something that I love playing with.
Yeah, that's cool. Do you know what that reminds me of? And one of the things I love is I call them happy accidents. I don't know if you've seen Bob Ross, but
Yeah.
you know, like there's this thing like where like there's gonna be like a kink in the rig, let's say like there's like a neck thing, and then I was like, oh, that was cool, and then I like made it more of a thing, but without that I didn't have the idea, but the computer gave it to me, and then it turned into this unique little idea that just like fit perfectly. And that's one of my favorite things about animation is just finding experimenting and then just finding ideas as they come and staying super flexible throughout the whole shot so that you can always like adapt and change. I think
Yeah,
that's really fun.
yeah. I mean, if nothing else, probably because when you show it, you're gonna get notes. So you always have to be nimble and on your feet and ready to change things and not get too attached to your ideas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you ever had the holy grail of a straight through approval first try?
Sometimes,
Sometimes. I had one.
sometimes, okay.
Yeah. I was like, but you know, it wasn't by any means like an acting like complex show. It's like one of those 25 frame bangers, you know, but it went straight through. That's
Yeah,
cool.
that's
Awesome.
magic when it happens.
Yeah. Sweet. So then, I'm really excited based on that. Obviously, that you're teaching the master classes here. It's going to be super valuable. So, for the first one, we're going to touch on the most important thing that you just mentioned, which is polish and appeal. So,
No, the
what
first one would be posing.
posing? Sorry, polish. Posing and appeal. So, what could we expect from that? What's a rundown? It's like I'm about to start rapping. What's a rundown of what's going what's going on in those classes?
Well, the reason that the first masterclass that I wanted to do is posing is because to me is the most important thing. Um, so it's kind of a deep dive into storytelling. Um, it's acting, and it's and as I've mentioned in passing, as we've been talking about these, it's one of the things that I find there's more room for me to help the students because some of these kids like they know how to polish better than me. It's like if you start animation like at a very young age, playing like I mean the same thing that I did at home with like my dad built me like a light box and I would do like 2D animation, but now
Oh
you
wow.
can do it at home with your computer. It's
Yeah.
like you can get very good at working fast
Hmm.
and polishing things and like little technical shortcuts that you can get, but almost with everybody on any range like in the spectrum of levels that you can imagine benefits from that. I've seen instant improvements. So in that sense, that's why I wanted to do that one. Also, is one that you can teach both on the computer and on drawing because the principles are the same, and that's something that I personally love because it expands the minds of whoever is like working on whoever shot that you're doing. It's like it's something that helps you see the world around you in a different way, you know? Because posing is not just what I said about Godzilla, like, I don't know, spitting fire. Posing is also the way a character sees, the way an actor in a movie, in a live action movie. Like sometimes there's a lot of things that we don't think about. And you're watching a movie that's a great way of sitting, you know?
Yeah.
Or like some guy is doing nothing on the screen and this is the way the character is standing. It's like there's so much knowledge in those kind of things. And also it's it brings so much to the shots and you can work any way that you work. CG animation offers you a lot of different ways of working. I know that my animation personally in 2D improved massively when I discovered the Richard Williams book and I started working like with poses and with breakdowns and then bringing that kind of knowledge to people that might have only worked like in an intuitive level on the computer. It's um it's so useful, you know. because
Yeah,
it's not just about posing, it's about the posing and the breakdowns of what is a breakdown, and what makes a pose a good pose. And um, if you're able to capture that on your shot, you're halfway there.
yeah. Well, yeah, that's a good point halfway there because you know if you've got like a solid A pose and a solid B pose, the only thing is how you're going to get there, right? But if both of those are not great, it's no matter how you get there, it's not going to really look that great. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I was just telling my students the today because there was a lot of softness in one of the shots. And I
Hmm.
said, you know, if you just take this pose, which is your key pose, and this one, and delete everything in between, and just set like an ease and an ease out, then you can just move them to
Yeah,
like find the timing. And if the poses are correct, you
yeah.
basically you can get very close. You can get 50% with just the good poses and just the ease in and ease out,
Yeah,
and then you know, drink all the magic on top of that. But
yeah.
without the posing, without the base, you well, it's just not gonna look good because that's what you build your
Exactly.
you know.
If you don't have strong poses, your character is just moving across the screen, and moving is like what the computer does. So it's
Yeah,
like it's it allows you to analyze what you're doing. A good pose allows for less movement because you're saying more with less, and in general, less movement is better. Also, something that I care a lot about in my animation is the composition and leading the eye of the audience, which
mhm,
I mean is something that it's not just animation. It's like it's cinema. Like
yeah.
every director directs that way, be it a person or an animated character. Is that you always have to know where the audience is looking, and then when you're working with the poses, you are in control of that. If you're just moving things around and everything is moving all the time, it's a mess. And we don't communicate, and ultimately, that's what you want.
I like that.
Mm.
That's cool. Awesome. So the first class is posing and appeal, and then the next three master classes. Could you tell us a bit about what will be covered in those?
Sure. Yeah. It's impossible to cover everything in one masterclass, and I wanted to make one special just for posing. Then probably the best way of working, of showing like a workflow of how you can elevate your scene would be like doing three others when you have like the three different phases of that I go through in a scene. Like the second masterclass after the posing one would be like working with video reference, working with thumbnails. That's the one that it's going to be more connected to posing. It's just that we go one step before that, before the posing. It's like how do you get to those poses? Like I'd be like in the first masterclass, we're going to be talking of posing a bit in a void, but when you have a scene that you have to animate, when you have a line of dialogue, when you have a certain frame and a certain amount of time that you have to communicate your idea, that is where you work with the thumbnails, you do some video reference, and then you distill all that into posing. I think it's also a very important thing because a sign of a junior animator for me is someone that doesn't translate the video reference into something that feels a bit more curated. I've I see so much what I call video reference acting around me, and it's normally some things that we were talking about, like the character is moving all the time. The character doesn't know what to do with its hands. Those kinds of things. That's something that I do when I work with my video reference. You know, it's like if you have the knowledge of the posing and what makes a good pose, then you look at your video reference. Like, how can I decipher this mess of a lot of like useless movements that only distract from what I have to communicate in my scene. So in that sense, all the planning, all the going over the video reference, doing your thumbnails, and then putting your poses in a scene with the timing, do like a rough blocking of timing when you begin to see that kind of thing that you were saying with your students, like, oh, maybe I don't need this posing here, you know? it seems that you might need it when you're thinking about the thing, because as we said before, making things simple is so difficult. So all the time, you almost all the time, you're gonna start with too many ideas. So how do you polish that? How do you clean your scene? That's probably the what we'll cover on on that masterclass. Then after that, it's like, how do you begin to build the scenes? Like once you have your poses, how do you do the breakdowns? How do you maybe some rough lip sync? Like as you're working with the something also that I maybe brought from 2D is that I hate doing like some things at the end. It's a preference.
Okay.
Like for instance, like, oh no, I just do all the body animation and then do all the face animation, or I do the lip sync at the very end. Sure, you have to do the lip sync at the very end, like the full lip sync. But I hate to do nothing at the beginning because because I tried things. You know, when I was starting, I would talk to other animators. How do you do these? How you do? And I tried, and then I realized that sometimes I would spend so much time doing like some kind of breathing or something, you know. And then it's like, oh, okay, it's done. Now I'm gonna do the face, and then you do the face, and you realize that you didn't need any of that because
Yeah.
the face carries the scene, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or you're working on some accent with the body, and then you realize that when you put the lip sync is synchronized, but it seems off because it's not working with like, I don't know, like maybe you could have like a line of action in the body, but maybe you want to put it around the time where the mouth is like wide open, for instance, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I would do like a rough lip sync. So it's like as you pose in the scene and you're doing the breakdowns, how you do the rough lip sync and things like that, you know.
Yeah.
Mm. And then the third one, which be like four in total, would be like the last, like the polishing, the the final lip sync when you go to the frame, making sure that everything is working, making sure that you carry the appeal from the poses at the beginning. You might start the shot with 3 poses, and you might end your shot with like 100 poses in there. How you carry the appeal from throughout the whole thing, and also something that I find very important that you can see in animating a scene is how many times I'm gonna do things wrong,
Yeah.
how many how many mistakes I'm gonna make, how you know, it's like it's not that I'm gonna like show up and it's like, okay, well, okay, what can I do? No, it's like, you know, it's like, okay, let's work on this shot. But also there's some things that I might be telling you that then I do, and it's like, oh, I can talk and talk about don't put too many poses, and then like just go and I mean it's happened to me all the time. I'm teaching something and then I go back to work the morning after and I make the mistake that I was telling the students not to make. But
Yeah.
that's not important. It's valuable to see that animation is difficult, that everyone struggles, and there's like some fun in struggling, and you know.
Yeah.
So that's also something that I was excited about bringing to the class, like to see is like, no, don't just put the expectations on yourself that you're gonna get to a point when everything is gonna be like la la la, la, you know.
Yeah.
That's not happen. You know,
Yeah.
it's like I talk to people that I admire so much, and they was like every time I go from step to spline is horrifying, you know.
Yeah.
And sometimes those were the most valuable lessons.
Hmm.
You
Yeah. I think that's extremely encouraging
know?
because it is interesting because it is one of those careers where you never feel fully on top of it ever
No,
or confident. You're always one step behind where
no,
you want to be. I guess it's always struggling, but and it's sometimes you could feel bad about that, but it's important to not and just
just
keep
have to just think that you have to just do the best you can, and then think there's always going to be another scene where I can maybe I don't know. There's a few things that I see now, usually after a few years, that I look at them as like this kind of work, but normally everything that I do is a failure. You know,
yeah.
that it turned out worse than I thought it would be. You know, it's like okay, it was always the next scene.
Yeah, but, I had kind of the opposite thing actually. When I get that feeling when I'm stuck and I feel like I can't do it, I just think of all the shots that I have done, and
Uh,
that I felt the exact same way on those
really?
shots, and that I somehow got them done.
Oh my God, it doesn't work for me.
Really? Yeah, well, I just think I just know that if I just keep going, I'll eventually get there.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
there's you have a point, but I wish I could believe it. Because I'm always like, nope, this is the one where I fail completely. This is the one when I have to give it back and say I cannot do it.
Have you done that? I've done it once, and it was the very first time it happened to me. I was I was on this shop for like over a month, and it was kind of going nowhere. And it got to the point where they're like, "Hey, we're just gonna give it to someone else." And at the end, it was like the biggest relief because like I lost this demon, but it was also the biggest
Yeah.
it was my first defeat. It was the first time I couldn't do a shot, and I was really annoyed by it, but also relieved. And then, but one of the biggest lesson that I took from that was that I suffered alone. Like
Yeah.
I
Oh
literally
yeah.
didn't tell anyone, and I was just like
Yeah.
8 hours a day, no progress. 8 hours a day, no
Yeah.
progress. And I never messaged the lead. I never messaged anyone, and eventually I
Yeah.
lost the shot. And then
Yeah.
so the next time, as soon as I got to that kind of same level of stuck, I just messaged my lead straight away and been like, bro, help me out here. And then they helped me and I was able to do it, It was a big
Yeah.
lesson. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes the only thing you need is fresh eyes because you get tunnel vision,
Mm.
and just by showing it to your lead or to a fellow animator, um, they can see it from the outside because it's such a weird thing to do. It's like you're living at 24 frames per second
Yeah.
and you get so stuck on something that maybe it's completely unnoticeable, or maybe it was working a week ago, and you're just noodling it. And when you have people around you to tell you, asking for help is so important. It's a team effort.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That
also
was,
something. It's
sorry.
when I'm teaching, what I like to talk about also is how it is to work in a studio, So
Hmm.
how it is to be an animator, not just talking about animation, but also talking about being a good team player, you know? Be kind to others, be kind to yourself. Don't take it too seriously. It's just a cartoon.
Yeah.
Sometimes those things are very important because you're gonna need them to keep going. Because the only thing that is gonna make you good is to keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And enjoy it. Who was I was talking to someone the other day. No, I wasn't. I wrote a status. It was about, do you enjoy the process of animation or do you enjoy the idea of being an animator?
Uh,
Because to me, the idea of being an animator is like just rocking up. We've got like cool studio, cool friends. You're animating all day, and you're just creating cool
really?
stuff. And then when you start working, you realize it's a little bit more factory
Yeah.
oriented. You get
Yeah.
cast your shot. You've got a deadline. You might get cast two shots on a tight deadline, and then
Yeah.
and it was a and I thought in my naivety I also thought that it was you had all the like I had no idea what an animation director was for, for
Yeah.
example, or that there was any, and I thought they're just like, let's make a movie and you can just choose how this person does this and stuff. It was massive. I went from absolutely no idea to like working on a film and just being like, whoa. So you don't just say your ideas in the dailies,
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
um, which I thought it was a lot more open than that. Sometimes it is, but obviously, when it's like your very first job, your very first film, and you're like, oh, should we try this? It's probably not a brilliant idea you're suggesting.
Yeah.
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 Cool. Well, yeah, I'm super pumped for that. I'm gonna. I'm not sure what time it is for me, but I'm gonna try and be there. Otherwise, I'll just watch the recording. But I'm pumped for these classes.
Oh, thank you.